When something happens to your car, you might say,
My car!
but what you really need to say is something that can actually help.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
And just like that, State Farm is there to help you file your claim right on the State Farm mobile app. So just remember, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
State Farm, Bloomington, Illinois.
Picking up where we left off from the last session, this is Picnic at Hanging Rock and a Valentine from Max. Synchronicity. When I was working, plugging in little segments, and they are dependent on time, I have to be in sync with what's happening. I'm looking at the time, and my time, the exact time, is ahead of where I am posting. So when I post this, I'm posting 6:19 to a site where the site says 6:17. That makes absolutely no sense. And technically, there could have been something wrong where that element was actually behind time, which is abnormal because it's in sync with multiple other sites, and it's supposed to be the standard. So for me to have something that was ahead of what I'm posting on that site was an attention getter. But that's because I've been dealing with different kinds of time elements. And when you deal with the non-physical realm, they're not stuck. In terms of working with spirit guides and the night lights, which I've been doing for 25 years, I have learned that I don't always have the option of saying this can't happen, because it happens. The explanation in this case could be that somehow my system was out of whack. Why is this important? What are we dealing with when it comes to time? We work within a linear framework, and everything goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. When I'm dealing with the non-corporeal or the spirit realm, time doesn't make any difference. It's the information is relevant, and so it's there, and I'm getting tagged in some way. This one was in reference to saying, pay attention to the details and how you're responding and how you're basing your actions on what you think is a concrete scenario, when in reality, anything's possible. It isn't concrete. It depends on how you approach it. That's really tough to wrap your mind around. So stick with me if you have also dealt with things intuitively, psychically, and had to learn that what we experience here isn't all there is to reality. That we're only very, very, very physically motivated, manifest, material plane motivated. The other and very real aspect that also exists alongside us is the non-material form, the non-physical form. And there are many, many elements to that, whether you're dealing with something that's a fairy, you're dealing with a ghost, you're dealing with a person who is no longer living, but at one point did have a body. I don't call them all ghosts. Some of those are just non-corporeals, but there's a lot of different ranges. With my experience with something that you would call a UFO or an ET, I've had a visual of that. But there was also something in the sky that appeared outside my house that didn't want me to see it. And so as I'm trying to get a glimpse of what this is, and I even reported it to MUFON, not knowing how to report something like this, because it looked like a gray space. And looking from me to the top of a tree, that's about the distance it was, so, 30 to 40 feet. And then there's something there that seems to be flying, a person. Again, I'm not supposed to see it, but I caught a glimpse of it. I stepped outside and looked at the right place at the right time, and then whatever it was tried to make itself invisible, so I wasn't supposed to see it. And I caught a glimpse of it twice, knowing that, okay, the first time wasn't a fluke. There's something there. I'm not supposed to see it. And I've had that happen before when I did see something that was very visual, very real, because it had lights on it, about the size of a dinner plate, and it had red and green lights. So when it didn't want to be seen, it just went through the wall and was hovering outside the window. I could see it through the mini blinds. And I knew, well, okay, that's the end of that. People ask, well, why don't you pursue, if you see something like that, why don't you pursue trying to get a picture, or when it doesn't want to be seen and it isn't in the same dimension that we exist in, it doesn't have the same physics. Our way of math doesn't apply. My intention immediately would be to try to get a frame of reference to remember it. And it helps if I write it down. These things I will forget if I don't write them down. And even then, when I go back and read my notes from 2, 3, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it's like, wow, I totally blanked that out. Because so many of these happen and they're so innocuous. In other words, they don't do any harm to anyone. They don't mess up my day, my planning, my life. They're just interesting. And they're anomalies. They don't make sense. They don't fit. So that makes it really difficult to try to share these experiences with other people who don't have them. And that's why I'm doing this in a podcast, because I know, given the audience that I have and I've developed over the years, that there are others like me who experience these things and really have nowhere to go with them except to say they happen and they aren't abnormal. They're interesting. And that's why I look for other people who also talk about this stuff. And that's initially what drew me to Picnic at Hanging Rock. That I didn't have any idea would come to the conclusion I recently figured out. There's a mystery, and the mystery has to do with time. And at the same time, that might not be the complete mystery. When I ordered, and this was the follow-up, The Secret of Hanging Rock, which the author had allowed to be published after she died. For one thing, reading the biography, reading about her, her friends called her a mystic. So she had other abilities that she could do in addition to stopping people's watches if she sat near them, that made her unique and interesting, and also made her uncomfortable discussing it in public because her husband wasn't into it. So she kept that silent, except the friends knew it because things would happen. One of the ladies who helped her publish and get the word out about the book to be able to find someone to do it as a film went to Hanging Rock. And for most people, Hanging Rock is a place. It's a beautiful area, park. The woman who went with her to this place said she felt odd and uncomfortable when she was there. And when she was there, her watch stopped. So whether it was being at that place or with Joan, you could go either way with that, or the combination of the two. There's something definitely about Joan that has to do with time. So when I'm doing all of this, finally getting her biography, that's still coming, by the way, getting The Secret of Hanging Rock, the follow-up, to say that this is actually what was supposed to be the final chapter in that book and on the film, that took it a whole different direction. And having the little time anomaly reminded me to go back and put the pieces together. Joan Lindsay, the author of Picnic at Hanging Rock, put the final chapter out that says that this is a time warp. Well, the other thing that came along with that, when they published The Secret of Picnic at Hanging Rock, this is the interesting part of that. There are 3 people who offer their perspectives in The Secret of Hanging Rock, 3 commentaries. And 2 are pretty much, what you would expect. But the third, and the reason I wanted to read it, Mudrooroo, Colin Johnson, died in 2019. The obituary, he was the premier Indigenous poet, novelist, essayist, playwright, and academic of the generation that created Aboriginal literature and Aboriginal rights movement in Australia. So his take on this experience, her novel, her fiction, her idea, was important to me to see what the Indigenous perspective might have been. And given my interest in UFOs and my experience with that, then this was a surprise and also very relevant. He said that he interpreted that from other experiencers in Australia to a UFO encounter, and that the missing girls and the missing teacher could be very, very much relevant to a UFO experience. And at the time she wrote it and the period she was writing it for, it would have killed the story. That's what I look for, because I think it's so much more real than everything that says there's no magic in the world and there's nothing unusual and we don't have multiple spirits and entities around us 24/7. They're here. They're right alongside us. Just because we can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. It means we need to up the ante and get better at using our telepathic and psychic awareness sensitivities. They're in the package. They're here. And a lot of times that's what we are tapping into when we have this sense of don't go there, or you need to act on this now, or so-and-so is calling. There are a lot of ways that we can use that element, that psychic ability, that are helpful and in some ways life-saving. The initial thing, if you're hearing voices, well, then that's drugs. The deal is, and in talking to my father, deceased, who was diagnosed as schizophrenic, paranoid schizophrenic, what he said I thought was fascinating. And this isn't the only person I've talked to who's deceased. So, there I am. Anyway, he told me that I had something he didn't. And he said that I had a filter and he had no filter. And he said that in this way, he couldn't block anything. And when they gave him drugs, medication, it made it worse, because then the entities, the voices, just came on stronger. He was like, you have a very good filter and you're able to block it. He said, I couldn't do that. And that was true. His entire life, and he didn't have a whole lot of help. There were times as a child when that was scary, really scary, because he said things that my mom said, Daddy's thinker doesn't work right. So she never tried to blame him for that, but he could be a scary person. So in talking to him, and the cool thing was when he died, I knew I couldn't get there. He was in another state. It would be maybe an 8-hour drive, and I knew he was fading. I knew it was his time. And I got an amazing affirmation of that. I'm on the phone with my mom, looking out the window, and I happened to be right up the street from a church, and this incredible. I said, Mom, I can't go there, Mom, and I'm talking to her about him passing, and this incredible rainbow appeared on the steeple of that church. And as I'm looking out and looking at that and talking to Mom, it was like, wow, I knew that was my message. That was him. Then he shows up, and he's you have this very real sense of him being next to me, and I don't see him. I just sense him and the feeling, and the words are typical of what he would say. I just came to see how the other half lives. So there's that very much that personal touch of still a sarcastic, and I don't take it as a negative. I just know, yep, that's Dad. Bingo. But checking in. And so then when I was able, years later, again, to have a conversation and ask him more about what it was like for him as dealing with the schizophrenia, and that's when I got that. I didn't even think about asking that earlier, but that's when I got the answer that I have a filter and I'm able to block the voices. Now, there are voices I have heard, and like they were, standing beside me. One, when I had been attacked and was getting away, I was okay, getting away. And at that time, though, I was able to confront the person, and at that moment could have pushed him over a balcony, 3 stories cement on the bottom. I just saw a hawk fly through the window. Okay, just outside, landed in the yard, went across. Anyway, timing. The gist of it was I was going to prevent this person from hurting anybody else in my mind. And of course, this is split second. There's no really thinking about it. There's just automatic, okay, I'll keep him from hurting or trying to attack anybody else. And I had an amazing in the power that came through me. It's like when you are in a crisis and all of a sudden you have superhuman strength. That's what I have. That's how I got away. And then this beside me voice said, karma. In other words, what had happened was done, was over with. And if I did anything further, then it would basically stick this kind of activity, and I would have to deal with it in a different way. But as it was, when I heard that word karma, I'm like, you've been here all along. I mean, you're just now saying karma. All these things go through your mind when these happen, but it was loud. It was a voice, and stopped me in my tracks as I watched this person walk off into the night, needle in a haystack. But dealing with that from another perspective, knowing that there had been a past life agreement, a past life confrontation that was going to put this individual on my timeline, and that I was going to have to figure out how to deal with it. And during that time, when this attack was happening, I had a ton of information just streaming in as I'm dealing with this and the fight or flight thing that goes on, and holding yourself in check to know that there are only 2 or 3 things that you have control over. One thing, you have control over your mind. You can control your thoughts and what you choose to, at that point, entertain as a possible resolution. And mine was I wasn't going to die in that moment. So that was pretty solid. And then the rest of it was this person wasn't going to hurt anyone else. So with that, those kinds of things gave me a different perspective and more energy, as I now know it had to do with chi and building chi in that moment, building that energy. And that came from past life. Certainly not something I had been practicing. And then after that, I did take some courses. Amazing. So it changed my frame of reference for what we can do, especially when we're in a moment of fight or flight. And that wasn't the first time, but that I just used that because it was a very loud voice. Another time, same thing. There was an encounter when I was a teenager with another girl. We were alone in a place I knew quite well. And then the voice said, run, and we did. I'm not going to get into all this right now, but the thing goes back to timing and working with your own internal abilities, your guidance, your instinct, your insight, and your psychic, absolute, normal, totally 100% activated if we believe in it, and if we allow it, and if we pursue it. And practice helps. Opportunity presents that encounter and says, okay, are you ready? And ready or not, here it is. So working with all of this time stuff and going back to introducing the element of a time warp in Picnic at Hanging Rock, and then having the guy who has the Indigenous perspective and says, this is a UFO thing. This plain and simple. This is a UFO thing, because that is one thing that is very unique about a UFO encounter. You have the fog. You have a time distortion. You have a sense of it's just kind of fuzzy, and you miss time. All of a sudden, it's been 3 hours and you thought it was 3 minutes. Or it was 3 minutes and you thought it was 3 hours. It goes either way. I've had an experience where I was in a time bubble and went from my place at work to my house and back in less time than could have been possible. But I had a clock. I looked at the clock, and there's just no way that I could have done that little jaunt in the time that I was supposed to have done it. That was a time bubble. Someone had explained to me the instructions were to actually create a bubble and see yourself going from point A to point B and in a certain time. I needed to know that I had to be back within, 5-10 minutes, whatever, and beat that. So when we get into these other reality sets, I'm trying to get the language for this, because every culture describes certain things with their unique words and language. And so if you're talking for Western culture, these are paranormal types of experience. Metaphysics is a good word for it. And there's a new word, phenomenology, anomalies. So those for me have been a real experience, a very real encounter with these beings and these others who occasionally pop in to tell me something's going to happen, or tell me not to do this, or tell me to pay attention to certain things. And that's what I've been doing. So when I have the opportunity to see this playing out right in front of me, and talking in terms of what happened for the last segment, that my husband and I had both had instances where overnight, each of us at one day apart heard a phone ring. And then that phone ring thing again appeared with my aunt, where she had a phone call. She thought it was from me. On her phone, it shows the activation on her end. And at the time that this is going on, my light is pulsing behind my computer as I'm doing my job. My light is pulsing, and I'm trying to figure out, well, okay, what's the deal? Well, the night light has also become active again. It'll take little break times, like for now that it's been going on for 20-some years, it takes a longer break time. It might be gone for a month or two where it stays out completely. And before, it would stay off saying, I'm not a night light, get over it, because it's the energy that I work with that activates the lights. And so the lights have been surging lately because there are a lot of things that are changing, shifting in our own timeline. And we have opportunities to act or not, and that determines the next step. Dealing with it like this makes things a lot more chaotic and a lot less certain. And so for some people, that's really uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable. However, for me, I find it interesting because with that, there are windows. There are more potentials. There's more possibility that things don't have to be set in stone, and that on another timeline, something else more positive and more beneficial is happening. And you can step into that timeline if you believe, if you allow, if you are aware. And I'm hearing the dog bark in the back room. So we'll see if he quiets down, settles down. Anyway, if you're more aware of those potentials, then you can work with it. There are some tremendous shamanic stories that talk about being able to bilocate, being able to walk through walls, being able to give yourself a different frame of reference because you are no longer stuck in this timeline. You're more fluid. Those stories, they speak to this without me having to embellish. Psychiatry in the Spirit World, True Stories on the Survival of Consciousness After Death, includes some interesting stories that have to do with, there's near-death encounters, but there's also experiences where dealing with the entities that are attached and being able to release those, and then the person all of a sudden has freedom they didn't have because there's not another influence there telling them, oh, you need another drink, or you're tired, or you can't do this. That you don't have that element trying to influence you, because that element really would like to take over and experience their own desires through the physical body, because they haven't quite gotten over that. And when you're around those kinds of entities, which I have been, and they try to influence you because you are either not doing what they want or because they need your help. And for me, it's been a little bit of both with those experiences. That the one person who was a suicide really was frustrated because there was supposed to be nothing after you die, and that wasn't the case. So all of a sudden, he needed help, and I was a person who he could attach to and try and get help from, and I still wasn't sure of my own abilities and how to do it. And so when I finally figured it out, I could help him move forward. But he was a pill. He was a pill. At one point, and I haven't talked about this before, but there were some downsides trying to get my attention. One, there was a smell of dead fish. Not the house that he was in, a house later, because he was still followed. And then the other thing, some things broke that shouldn't have broken, that there was no way that they, but another thing, trying to get my attention, trying to get me to wise up and, at least try to acknowledge that this presence was here in my space and needed help. So a lot of this, I guess my point is really trying to drill down on the fact that we are not alone. We think we're alone because we don't see some of this stuff. But recently somebody posted about a child, and the child is, I believe, 5. And the child said, I have bad thoughts. I have at night. And the child went to sleep with the mom and dad for a week because these bad thoughts. My mind is telling me scary things, I believe is how it was phrased. My mind is telling me scary things. With that, what I'm hearing is this child has an entity who is influencing him. not dangerous things, uncomfortable things, like you'll have a bad experience. This bad experience is going to happen. And it was kind of a neutral, the one that didn't involve, it's for a child, it's scary. I'm trying not to expose the source, okay? So it's a general description here of what's going on. The same thing, though, happened with another relative, same thing, of having this influence and not knowing where to go with it, what to do with it. And when you try to tell people that there are entities and other beings that children can see and can connect with, because at that point in their lives, they aren't clear that the adults don't see this stuff. So when it becomes obvious the adults aren't tuned in and don't see this stuff, then a lot of times kids will stop talking about it. Or it will gradually fade away because they become more fixed on the physical and the concrete stuff around them, and they downplay or disconnect from that spiritual, metaphysical element. That's a very normal part of us. So when that happens, then they lose contact. That's just a part of growing up. Other times, it's because it's still happening, but they're not being given any help or support to help actualize it and help become more aware and more efficient and more effective at blocking the things that are not helpful and allowing the things that are positive and nurturing and supportive, because it's all out there. Learning how to differentiate between the lower level entities who are more likely to drain us because we are energy and you're a battery to them. And so the more they're around you, a negative entity can make you feel tired. And if they're really annoying, tell you things that are not fun to hear, just to get your attention and to feel the buzz. But positive energies, you will feel an infusion of love, but also of just like a bubble. It's very, very buoyant and positive, uplifting. So when I'm channeling, and I do that in a positive way, afterwards, I will feel just absolutely jazzed, really psyched, and it's just fulfilling, and it's a very, very pleasant feeling. It can be addictive. You have to go, because you'll wear yourself out that way too. It's just, small doses. But also sometimes that over amp will leave me needing to hug a tree or do something to help normalize, neutralize, and come back down to earth. So that's dealing with positive energies. Negative energies, you can end up with a headache, a heartache, a backache, all sorts of physical ailments when you take that stuff on, because again, there's a way that it attaches to you, and depending on what organ or where you are vulnerable, where you have some kind of an affinity, some kind of something in sync with this entity, that's where you may feel the drain. Some people feel it, others don't, and it's still there. So that's why I started getting more determined to share that there are other entities around us. And the more you become aware of that, at least, personally, you can help sort out things that you don't need in your environment and your spiritual space, because it will be in so many ways beneficial to know that that's a possibility and you can rule it out. Praying is helpful, and praying isn't directed at I want. It's thank you. Okay, that's a whole different thing. Praying is thank you. And there's a different energy that goes with that. But constantly praying, I need, I want, I wish, can you give me, all that, that's a very, you can hear it, it's draining. Whereas that gratitude, that grace, that appreciation is a whole different kind of energy, and that fills the cup. That fills, it brings energy in and gives you that kind of refresh, refuel, empowerment. It's all called praying. That's the thing about it. It's just a matter of making it work for you. as opposed to draining you and everything else around you. So there's a different way of dealing with that and helping to build a protection, a barrier, a filter to help keep yourself buoyant and buffered and energized. Doesn't mean you don't get tired. It just means that these other entities that are around you have to go through a wall. They can't just immediately connect and engage. They have to pretty much ask permission. So going back to the secret of Hanging Rock and having that other experience where my time didn't add up. Okay, yeah. So I'm posting from my end at 2:20 and the site is at 2:19. How did I get ahead? I don't understand it. Unless something on one of the ends, my computer was wrong or that system was wrong. Usually they are in sync. No difference in the time. That's why it was, wow, what happened? And what is this really about? One of the little sayings included in the book came from Edgar Allan Poe. And that's all that we see or seem is but a dream within a dream. And dreams are out of sequence, out of time, where you just have little snippets. And so you've had an experience where time wasn't linear. And that's what happens when we start paying attention. Sometimes we have information in advance. How does that work? It's like when I had this, I had the entire thing ahead of time. On my end, it was 2:20. And on their end, it was 2:19. So I'm posting something from the future to a past timeline. You make sense of that. I can't. But that's why I wanted to share it, because it's an example of the things that I have experienced that make me curious about all of the things here that we take for granted that are really just pieces, small pieces of the equation that are not set in stone and are not, in any way, shape, or form, finite. There are so many more possibilities that we can experience when we open our mind and say, what is real here? The only thing in this reality that is real is you. I'm here. I'm fiction for you. I don't exist. I'm just part of the story. I'm filler. Take what you can use, carry it forward, and make it yours. That's how it works. Everything here is fodder. It's a piece of the equation. What you do with it, that's what's real, and that's what counts, and it carries you forward. So as you continue to build on your storyline, take the things that make it work, make it valid for you, and create a reality that carries you forward. So you don't have to repeat this one. like the spirit guide who said, karma, karma. Do not do that. It won't fix anything. And it will perpetuate a situation that you have just concluded. All right? Hadn't thought of it like that. It was kind of irritating because it doesn't work with the reality that we, that eye for an eye thing, or I can fix this by getting rid of the adversary. No, you just make it reappear in a different form. And that's the picture that I was given. Let it be. Let it go. It has concluded. Thanks for listening. I'll put some links on the blog.